Welcome to Exhuming the Truth. This podcast is dedicated to cold cases, missing persons, systemic injustices, and the art of forensic science that seeks answers when silence remains. My name is Asha Carmody, and I am a forensic scientist and a criminologist. And in each episode, we examine the evidence, the systems, and the human stories that are often left behind. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Exhuming the Truth. I'm so happy to have you here, and I'm even more happy to know that we have been getting really great feedback from our last episode of Field Notes with Chris G, who is of course a forensic fire investigation specialist, which is absolutely insane. I hope that you learnt as much from Chris as what I did when I had a chat with him. And if you haven't already, if you've listened to the episode on Exhuming the Truth with Chris G, you can also find his podcast, The Evidence Trail, where I'm a guest on his podcast. We did back-to-back. So I was a guest on his and then he was a guest on mine. We did that all in one night and it was really fun. I had a really great time chatting with Chris, and he is somebody who is very knowledgeable, and I'm sure you picked up on that if you've listened to it, because we've got really great feedback, like I said, and I'm very appreciative of Chris and, sharing his time with us and allowing us to speak with him. So I'm glad you guys have had a listen. There has been a lot of really awful stories in the news right now, going on across Australia, obviously, of course, internationally as well. But speaking locally in Australia, there's been a lot going on. So it's been really hard to pick one case, for every Tuesday. So if there is enough interest, we will do Tuesdays and Thursdays each week. Just depends what you guys want. I know a lot of people are listening and waiting for part 2 of the Strongsville crash. Again, we are waiting for a document to be sent to us that we cannot access here in Australia. We need someone from the USA to access that and send it to us to be able to finish that episode. It's nearly done. I've just got that final analysis waiting, and I can't piece it all together until we have that, unfortunately. So that's what is holding us up. I did put a call out on Facebook to say, if you have any case ideas or cases you want covered rather, and there was like 80 or 90 different cases listed on there. So I've added them all to the list. I will try and get through everyone that everybody's recommended, but of course it is going to take time. Now, today is a bit of a heavy episode, so I want to give you that warning. This is, your trigger warning for this episode, because it does discuss domestic violence, coercive control, child homicide, suicide, and systemic failures. This is the preventable murder of baby Kobi Shepherdson. Today's case is one of the most heartbreaking coronial findings to come out of Australia in recent years. It is the story of 9-month-old Kobi Shepherdson, and Kobi was exactly that, 9 months old. She was just a baby, and a baby who should still be here today, and a baby whose death, according to a South Australian coroner, was very much preventable. This is not simply a story about one dangerous man. I want to make that clear. It's a story about coercive control and warning signs, and that's something that I want you to really pay attention to and take away from this very, very sad story. It's also a story about what happens when multiple systems fail to recognize the true level of risk posed by an offender. So in this episode, I am going to walk you through these really awful events. We're going to do that chronologically. We will examine the warning signs and discuss the findings that have been handed down by Acting Deputy State Coroner Ian White. That occurred in June 2026, so this is very, very recent. But first, let's talk about Kobi. Kobi Anastasia Isabel Shepherdson. What a beautiful name for a beautiful little baby. Kobi was born in 2020, and by all accounts, she was a happy and loved little girl. But before her first birthday, she became caught in the middle of an escalating domestic violence situation involving her father, His name is Henry David Shepherdson. What followed would ultimately lead to one of South Australia's most shocking murder-suicides. So let's jump back a little bit to December 2020, and this is when we can see the first major warning signs in this situation. So it's December 2020, and Henry Shepherdson was arrested and charged with serious offences that involved Kobi's mother. And the court records show the charges included false imprisonment, threatening to kill, domestic violence-related offending, and others. So authorities were sufficiently concerned that a no-contact order was imposed, and this prevented Shepherdson from contacting both Kobi and Kobi's mum. And importantly, court documents revealed that police opposed bail, and they cited concerns about Henry's violent history and also the fact that he did have access to firearms. Now, none of these are minor allegations, let me highlight. They're very significant indicators of a potentially lethal outcome. Now, let's talk about when he's in prison, right? Because there were phone calls, and despite the no-contact order that was placed upon him, Henry continued contacting Kobi's mother while he was in custody, and not once or twice. According to the evidence, this is the evidence that was examined during the inquest, he breached the order 149 times through phone calls from prison, and the calls weren't simply just conversations either. The coroner actually found they formed part of an ongoing pattern of coercive control, and this pattern was designed to manipulate and pressure and ultimately regain influence over Kobi's mum. And domestic violence experts often explain that kind of coercive control not being about isolated incidents of violence. It's about total domination in a way, and just creating fear and making that victim feel like there's just absolutely no way out, and almost as if they're just being suffocated by this person, which is very appropriate wording for this situation. Now, come early 2021, and we have a disturbing clue. So evidence heard during the coronial inquest that while Henry was still in prison, he discussed taking Kobi to the Whispering Wall. And the Whispering Wall is a major tourist attraction that's located at the Barossa Reservoir in South Australia. And at the time, the comment may have appeared insignificant, you could say, but in hindsight, it's very, very concerning because months before Kobi's death, he had already expressed a desire to take her there. So just keep that in mind. The Whispering Wall, he's mentioned he wants to take Kobi there. So with that, we can slide straight into risk assessment failures, because one of the most significant findings of the inquest involved failures in risk assessment itself. So the evidence heard by the coroner revealed that Kobi and her mother were classified as medium risk, not high risk. Now, later evidence suggested that the classification was in fact very wrong, and the difference between medium and high risk is not just paperwork. A high risk designation can trigger additional monitoring, information sharing, intervention strategies, and safety planning. So with all of this, the coroner ultimately found that multiple agencies involved made pretty enormous errors in assessing and managing the risk posed by Henry to Kobi and Kobi's mum. So it's March 2021, and this is when Henry is released from custody. And as charges progressed, Kobi's mother withdrew aspects of her complaint, and the inquest examined whether the ongoing pressure exerted through hundreds of prohibited phone calls — remember, he was calling her over 149 times — so they're questioning whether that actually contributed to that outcome, and she kind of felt pressured to withdraw bits and pieces of her complaint. And eventually Shepherdson was released from custody in March 2021. And the dangerous cycle of coercive control hadn't ended there. And in many ways, it was actually escalating, because come April 21st, 2021, this is the exact day that changed everything. So on that morning of April 21 in 2021. So what am I talking about? April 21st, 2021, a court variation allowed Shepherdson to contact Kobi. Now, the arrangement was intended to allow him to care for his daughter while her mother attended an appointment. But hours later, Kobi was dead, and so was her father. But before this tragedy unfolded, Shepherdson made a final call to Kobi's mum. And according to the evidence later presented to police and to the coroner, he told her, and I quote, "This is the way it has to be." Those words would become some of the most haunting evidence heard during this entire inquest. Now, Kobi's mother later realised something was terribly wrong, but by that time, and given she was in an appointment, it was too late. So let's talk about the Whispering Wall, because that day, Shepherdson travelled to the Whispering Wall at the Barossa Reservoir. Now, there were members of the public present, and what occurred next horrified witnesses, and there were several witnesses that day. So Henry was holding 9-month-old Kobi, and he jumped approximately 36 metres from the structure. Now, both of them died on impact, and the incident was immediately recognised as a murder-suicide. A baby who had never celebrated her first birthday was gone. Now, it's taken all this time for this to be seen in front of the coroner's court. So come June 2026, the coronial inquest began examining a difficult question. And I think it's one that we can all pretty much very easily answer. But ultimately they were looking at, could this have been prevented? And the answer delivered by Acting Deputy State Coroner Ian White was clear, and it was a very big yes. So the coroner actually concluded that Kobi's death was very preventable, and he described Shepherdson as a manipulative, self-absorbed and dangerous man. And the findings identified failures that included, first of all, risk assessment processes like we highlighted, domestic violence management, the prison communication monitoring, which is just absolutely absurd, not just on one occasion, on 149 occasions, the information sharing, the interagency cooperation, and of course, the responses or the lack of responses to coercive control allegations. Now, the coroner was also very critical of evidence that appeared to place responsibility on the victim for not reporting every breach of the no contact order, and described aspects of that approach as victim blaming, which of course it is, and it is not up to Kobi's mum in any way, shape or form to prevent this. It's up to the system to. And there's a bigger lesson, obviously, that comes from this, because this case is just so incredibly sad for so many reasons, and it's such an onion because there's so many layers that went wrong here and so many ways this could have been prevented. And it's highlighting something that domestic violence researchers have repeatedly warned about, and that is the period immediately after separation is often one of the highest risk periods for homicide. And when coercive controllers begin losing power, that's when things tend to escalate, and that's just in statistics. Their threats become a lot more serious, and their behaviour becomes very, very unpredictable, and children often become targets because these people who are acting under, possessive thoughts and coercive control, they want to find something that really gets to the victim, and often that only thing that they can really find that isn't the victim themselves is their children or their shared children. And when a system's going to actually take these warning signs seriously is a major question that I had after listening to and reading through this inquest, because in this case, in Kobi's case, I had noted down so many warning signs. Like, obviously, we have the threats to kill, we have the domestic violence allegations, the false imprisonment allegations, the repeated breaches of court orders, the calls from prison 149 times. Like, be so for real. Like, this would have happened or should have happened one time, one call, and that should have been it. He should have been in there for even longer. The coercive control, the manipulation from custody, and the risk assessment concerns. But despite all of these indicators, and there's more, those were just the massive ones, the system failed to appreciate the full danger, and it's Kobi and Kobi's mum who've had to, cop that, and they're the ones who have to live with that. Like, Kobi's no longer here. Kobi's mum has to live with not only the trauma of going through domestic violence and coercive control, but losing her daughter to that, which is just unfathomable. Like, Kobi Shepherdson was only 9 months old. 9 months old. She never got the chance to start school, or she never got to discover who she would become. And according to the coroner, her death should never have happened. And I have to agree entirely. There's just so many things that have gone wrong here. And how did we get this so wrong? A lot of the time it's really easy to focus on the final act, but it's really important to look, long before that tragedy happened, and you can see where we could have pivoted and the prevention could have happened. And it happens when threats are taken seriously. Like, I just couldn't stress this enough. When coercive control is actually recognized, like, yes, in some states it has been recognized under the law, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these systems and these agencies are taking it seriously when somebody comes forward. And most importantly, victims need to be believed. And beyond that, agencies are very well known to not communicate with each other, which is only a detriment to the victim. The legacy of this case should not be limited to the tragedy at the Whispering Wall, and Kobi shouldn't be remembered for the way that she lost her life. It should be the reforms that ensure another child is not lost in the same way, because Kobi deserves so much better, and so did her mum. And I really feel for her, because this is so awful, and she must feel so incredibly not just heartbroken, but let down by not just one system, but all of them. This was a really sad one to have to listen to in the inquest and also read through. Obviously, especially as a mum, it's not easy to listen to that and kind of empathise with a mother who has lost her child. It's very, very sad, and I almost feel partially like collectively we have all just failed. Like, the system has just failed this family so bad. It makes me feel really awful for her and for Kobi, and if anything does come from it, I really hope it is that this does not happen to another mother and another daughter or son, or, any family. It's just so awful. Thank you so much for joining me today. You can jump on across basically all social media, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and you will find us Exhuming the Truth. You can also jump across to Exhuming the Truth Hope Project, which is our charity that is on Facebook, and you will be able to find all of our links there to see all of the work that we are doing and planning to do in the future. We also have our first interstate field deployment coming up at the end of this month. We are flying from Perth to Brisbane and then taking a nice long drive to the South Burnett region. And we are going to be helping look for Jack McLennan. If you are in that area and you wish to volunteer, please get in contact. We would love to have you. We have a lot of people willing to help, which is fantastic, but there's never too many people. If you're willing to volunteer, we would love that. You can contact us by email, through our social media channels, or just send me a text. And thank you so much for being here. Have a beautiful day.